I'm Jay Horton. I make movies that make money, and this is Filmmakers On. Today, I'm talking to filmmaking guy Rob Hardy. Rob runs Filmmaker Freedom, a website that, like my channel, is here to help inform other filmmakers. We get into marketing, distribution, filmmaking stuff, pretty much all the things. So let's do the interview. I am here today with Rob Hardy, who started up Filmmaker Freedom. How you doing, Rob?
I'm good, man. How about you?
I'm doing okay. I'm getting ready to take a trip to Vegas. I leave tomorrow. I'm shooting a documentary on a black male review.
What does that mean? Black male review.
Exotic dancers.
Oh, like my mind immediately jumps to that is probably a niche that is tremendously unsaturated, where you can come in and make something and be like the most obvious choice for people who care about this really tiny sliver of, I don't know, the entertainment world.
Yeah, well, the guy that commissioned me to do it is a filmmaker named Jean-Claude Lamar. I'd worked with him in the early part of my career. Actually, he gave me my first couple of major editing gigs. He directed a movie called Chocolate City a few years ago, and there's a sequel, Chocolate City 2, and it's basically an African-American version of Magic Mike. You know, I mean, it's its own story, but like if you were pitching,
Yeah.
you'd say, hey, it's an African version, it's a black Magic Mike. But anyway, they did really, really well. And they've thought, and then based on the movie, they actually created a real review in Vegas that did really well for a few years. And then they wanted to do a documentary about it. So that's what I'm doing.
Wait, so they actually built out like a physical business in Las Vegas based on the success of the films?
Yes. And we're
that's nuts.
we're talking independent films here. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
decent budgets, not like they're not micro budget by any stretch, but they're not, studio stuff.
That's super cool. I don't know. I'm also always thinking about like ways that you can parlay the attention and the trust of the audience that you're building into these other types of businesses, other types of assets that can, better monetize that trust and attention in the long term. Because, a $9.99 movie transaction is great, but a business on its own, it just does not make a business.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of a problem that I have in general and a lot of the documentary stuff that I'm doing now. Like I've done a ton. Like I think I'm closing on like 30 feature documentaries this year. And
this year?
This year, 20.
Yeah.
I did 20 in 2020, but probably almost 30 overall now. And I have like maybe 10 in the pipeline. But
can we just stop to admire how insane and amazing that is? Like, respect. Yeah.
Thanks, man. I talk a lot on my channel about, quick release method and about, like shooting movies fast and editing them fast and doing a lot of stuff. And, I talk about it and I make it sound easy, but the truth of the matter is I've been doing it for 20 years now. I mean, if I say, hey, I edited a movie in 5 days, I mean, what I can do in 5 days isn't necessarily what somebody starting out can do. So now, not everybody can put out that much output, but I still think the model is sound.
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is being prolific. Like the only way you get to that place where your skills are so developed and your instincts are so sharp that you can just go make these things is you got to make a lot of things. I don't know. It reminds me of that old like parable of like Picasso sitting at a cafe and he's just doodling on napkins. And he like doodles something and crumbles it up, throws it in the trash. A woman comes along, picks out the napkin and says, how much for this little drawing? And he's like, $10,000. And she's aghast. And she's like, but you drew it in 30 seconds. And he's like, no, ma'am, it took me 20 years to be able to draw that in 30 seconds. You're paying for the 20 years beforehand.
Right.
And it's, I don't know, it's the same idea. It's just the accumulation of experience is what gets you to the point where you're able to do really miraculous work or even quality substantive work quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. And you never know. I mean, one of the docs that I did this year, I wasn't particularly excited about it. I liked the idea, but it was kind of, we had an extra interview from a separate documentary and we decided to kind of take this and make it into its own thing. I wasn't particularly excited about it, but I was like, all right, I'm just going to do it. And I put the thing together in probably 3 days, like post, and I was just like, okay, I'm just going to put it out because my expectations were pretty low. And it was my number 2 earning documentary this year.
I don't know, another one of those just funny lessons that the universe teaches you as a creative over time. It's the things that you give the shit about the least end up like outperforming everything else. But when you like really put all of your heart and soul and energy into it, those are the things that people just tend to ignore. It's just a really sad, ironic twist of being a creative person.
Yeah. And I also think it's important to understand that, like, when I talk about that project and I'm like, I wasn't really that excited about it, but truth of the matter is it doesn't matter what the project is. Like, I'm so passionate about the process of making movies, like, which is another thing that allows me to shoot so many different types of things, whether it be documentaries or narrative comedies or horror movies. Like, I don't stick in one genre, and it's not like this career, like, I don't want to be boxed in thing. It's just, I legitimately like making all those different types of things. So, that allows me to do that.
That's fascinating. And that's where I don't know what happened. Cause that was me back in, I don't know, I want to say like 2010, 2011, like just like eat, sleep, breathe, filmmaking, constantly working on things, constantly making little things, like, I don't know, in my bedroom or taking a camera around the neighborhood, like all the things. And somewhere along the way, part of it was that I realized that indie filmmaking was a terrible way to make a living, at least through the traditional way. So it's like, shit, I need to figure out how to support myself. And I ended up going down the essentially marketing and entrepreneurship rabbit hole, but I was doing marketing services, whether it's, copywriting or email marketing or things like that for clients. And also like running Filmmaker Freedom and all of this. And ultimately, like, I found that I really, really love marketing and getting in the weeds on it. I never would have imagined that 10 years ago. Because I was one of those creatives who's just like, I'm going to make work that's so good that I don't ever even have to think about the business side of things.
Yep.
And it's crazy how big of a 180 I've done. And now these days I like kind of being on set and helping, but I don't really have the drive to spend a year or two on a feature film. I've become so enamored with the problem of how do you make a living with indie films, and how do we specifically reach niche audiences that are underserved? How do we build profitable media businesses on the top of those niche audiences? And that's become just such a crunchy thing that I love sinking my teeth into every single day.
I completely agree. I mean, I still really like, making my movies, and I, continue to do it. But, I started this YouTube channel and started talking about stuff like this. And I honestly, like, so I've been doing the channel serious for about a year now, and it has just like, it's changed everything with how I make my movies. I mean, I'm still making the same amount, but like the way that I market them, how I market them, how I distribute them, that has all changed once I started really digging into this. And to be honest, like right now, I get a little bit more joy out of doing the YouTube thing, doing the podcast thing, than I do the movies.
Or it's relieving for me to hear other people say that, because like I get such a kick out of it, and like serving the community, especially because so many people are stuck and frustrated and just not enjoying the process as it is. Like, to be able to come in and use the marketing skills and a lot of these like entrepreneurship principles that I've been in the weeds on for years, and to build bridges between that world and the filmmaking world, and to really serve people, like, I don't know, it gives me the warm fuzzies, I don't know, in a way that I rarely ever got from filmmaking. Like, I don't know, I had a few sets that I was on and a few projects that I worked on that were, I don't know, just so much fun and that I'll remember forever. But I don't know, that's like 5% of the stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a hot take, but I feel like, just, and this is a super generalization here, but I think in general, being a film director, film writer, filmmaker is a self-serving profession. Being someone who's sharing information about film, or being a film, I don't want to use the word guru, I hate that word, but somebody that's sharing the information, that like, that's a service, like you're like helping other filmmakers. I mean, sure, there's an argument to be made for your movies. They're creating joy and entertainment, or you're educating people. There's all those things, and I'm not denying that, but I'm just saying in general, as a filmmaker, it's kind of self-serving.
I think that's a really interesting segue into something, like you reached out to me maybe like a week or two ago to schedule this, and we're talking about people promoting themselves in our Facebook groups that we run.
Right.
And the thing that just drives me batshit insane in regards to these Facebook groups and seeing just a constant stream of filmmakers being like, here's my movie on Amazon, go watch it, is that it's an incredibly, I think self-centered is just the way to put it, is like, it starts from an assumption that they're the center of the universe and that everybody else in the world should align themselves and their attention and their energy and their money around this thing that they made. And, you know, whatever. But from a marketing standpoint, what moves the needle is when you put your empathy hat on and well, for starters, you figure out who the hell it's actually for. For most filmmakers, it's not other filmmakers. So stop just posting your shit in filmmaking groups and calling that marketing.
Right.
For fuck's sake. I'm sorry if I'm not allowed to cuss on your show.
Oh, it's fine. I like it.
God damn it, man. So figure out who it's actually for. Who's the group of people that would most enjoy this story and who would care about it and want to spread the word further out into the community, and then go find where they hang out online and engage with them and share your film in that context and show them why they specifically should care from a place of empathy, from a place of understanding them. And you will be surprised at how much people actually engage and comment and share and go to watch it on Amazon or go to Gumroad or go to wherever you have it, because you've earned their attention, you've earned their trust by being empathetic. But if you just post in Facebook groups like, hey bitches, watch my movie, nobody is ever going to do that, like ever.
Very, 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 very few. And so let's dig a little bit deeper into that, into the marketing and reaching the audience, because that's one, I've done a lot of videos on this, and then it's a question I get. I'll do a 15-minute video and then I'll get comments, still wanting to dig deeper into it. So like, how does a filmmaker find that audience? How do they map that audience? Like,
oh man. So my rather contrarian take here is that it doesn't start with the movie that you're making. It starts with the audience. And I'm a big believer in this idea that you identify a niche that, for one, is that you're passionate about. It's a group of people that ideally you're part of. Ideally, it's an identity group that, it's your identity as well. So you have this shared bond with a specific group of people who are congregating online in some way, whether it's Facebook groups or subreddits. Ideally, there's an existing media ecosystem. So there's other bloggers, podcasters, influencers, social media people, people with audiences producing media. Because if you can go and find that ahead of time, it's a signal that there's a market there, that there's a hunger for content around this specific thing that people are congregating around in the niche. So my general feeling is that you start with that, and then you make something that is tailor-made for this specific group of people. Because I honestly think when you just go out and make a movie and you make whatever you want to make, and let's say you make a horror film, like people tend to be gaga over horror films on the assumption that it's just going to be more profitable. But fundamentally, when you make that choice and you just make something based on genre, before you've ever even written a word or shot a frame, and definitely by the time you've gotten to the end, all you've made is another commodity in the market.
Right.
And if that's your starting place, you don't really have a chance in hell of earning people's attention and trust and getting them to actually give a damn about what you've made. So much of what I do in terms of identifying a niche and then making something for them is sort of reverse engineered from that question of how do we get people to actually care? Not just like, I don't know, that looks like a fun thing to watch and they watch it in the background, but like, how do we get them to actively like, I don't know, just glued to the screen and like, oh, where has this film been all my life? Why? I don't know, like, and how do you make something like that somebody would actively choose over the latest Avengers movie or the latest like $200 million horror jamboree.
Right. And
Like,
something that they would want to actively support beyond watching it, like sharing
yeah,
it, telling you
yeah,
got to check this out. I mean, you know, you see people on
yeah.
Facebook all the time, like, I just finished the last season of Fargo. It was incredible. You know, we want to have people talking about us that way.
Yeah, well, exactly. And you get to that point by making something that is worth caring about for a specific group of people. And if you just make a generic, genre film, like, especially like, and most of us aren't going to do it as well as everything else in that genre, just on account of we're working with limited resources,
Mm.
you've already lost the game. So the question should be is like, how can I earn attention and trust from a specific segment of the market? And then how can I deliver something that they are going to absolutely love? And then, let's find a good example here. Like, what do you think is a good, I don't know. We'll use I have a friend named Mike Dion, who you may or may not know. Do you know Mike?
No, I do not.
Oh my God, Mike's the best case study ever. And you should have him on the show. But he's the guy who got me sort of thinking about this. And he makes documentaries about bike packing. But it's like those crazy people who will ride halfway across the country with nothing but what's on their back.
This sounds really familiar. I think I have seen an interview or maybe I read your case. You have a case study on your site about this, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I talk about him all the time because
I think I read that.
He's the one who sort of got me down this niche path, because I met him in Denver in like 2016 or 17 when he was like launching a film and doing a whole bunch of cool stuff with Kickstarter. But we got coffee and he was explaining to me how he was doing what he was doing. And I had this aha moment, because at the time I was working for clients and I was like, indie film should just be a hobby. Like, you can't make this a business. And hearing exactly what he was doing and how he'd made it a business over 5-10 years by serving this bikepacking niche, it's like a tiny niche compared to anything you can imagine. Like, seeing that he was just doing the same things that I was doing for my clients as a marketing service provider gave me that aha moment. It's like, oh shit, the skills that I already have and I'm using for, my freelance business are applicable to indie filmmakers. And it's what sent me down this rabbit hole. But he's made like 4 or 5 features for this really obscure niche of bike packers. And, he'll document a race or a certain set of athletes, and nobody, like 99.5 or more % of the population has no fucking clue about what these races are or who these athletes are. But for this really tiny specific segment of the population who are into like outdoor sports and like endurance stuff, and specifically into bikepacking, like, it is so much, like, the films that Mike has made are so much more worthy of their attention. They're so much more worthy of talking about and buying a whole bunch of, like bonuses and DVD versions and all of this than anything that Hollywood could ever make. And that was sort of the light bulb moment for me.
Right. And when you're doing something like that, you can, I don't want to use the word upsell, but you can upsell, you can sell the merchandise. You can, your DVD can be a little more expensive. You can self-distribute the physical media. Whereas if you're doing something a little more genuine or general, self-distributing physical media can be, a big loss.
Exactly. And you really need to talk to Mike, because he is a hardcore marketer, very trained in like direct response. And like, he used so he created a whole bunch of sort of back end products, because people who are interested in bike packing, they're going to be interested in gear and tutorials and education and yada yada yada. So he like bundled together this package of stuff, and he did a what's known as like a free plus shipping funnel. You see it a lot with books. Essentially, you're paying for advertising on Facebook, Instagram, wherever, saying, get this DVD for free. And obviously it's super, super targeted to just this community. So it's get this DVD for free, but just pay for shipping. So you get people entering their credit card information and getting a free DVD or Blu-ray. And then they're immediately presented with an upsell, maybe even 2 or 3 upsells, depending on what you have. For him, I think it was like bike packing secrets, or, I don't remember exactly what it was called, but this is how he was able to, buy traffic on Facebook and wherever else, but actually profit from it. Because if you're trying to do this with just a film, especially for just driving people to Amazon, like you're never going to profit from that. A lot of people think that they are, but the economics of it are so backwards. But when you actually own the customer relationship and you can present them sequentially with these offers, you can actually make money on paid traffic as a filmmaker and actually acquire these customers or actually get them into some sort of continuity or membership program where they're paying you in perpetuity. That's, I don't know, it takes a little bit of marketing know-how and it takes thinking like an entrepreneur. But that for me was just so eye-opening. It's like all of these things that I am like doing with clients and helping them set up these systems, whether they're startups or education companies or whatever, like seeing a filmmaker do the exact same thing was just like, how do we get more people doing this? Because this, for me, it's clearly the future. And I still think it is, even though, you know, it hasn't caught on as quickly as I would hope, but
I feel like the worm is turning. Like I feel like we're at a point now where the traditional method has broken down so much. And contrary to, you know, a lot of what we're saying here, it's not quite dead yet. There are still people that are making their living doing it. To be 100% honest, I mean, probably 70% of my income still comes in from these, you know, traditional means, but I'm pivoting, you know, because I know that that's not a long-term thing and that it's constantly changing. I mean, this year, I think I probably brought in maybe even 70% of my income came from Amazon. Maybe not stuff that I necessarily distributed myself, but stuff that I have out there that's still, Amazon's still my biggest platform.
Yeah, that's always been one of the interesting things is like, you've been like the foremost documenter of Amazon's really shady business practices and how they constantly undermine any filmmaker's ability to make a living on the platform.
Right.
And my framing all along is, or I guess my approach all along has been, how can you sell directly to fans where you actually own the customer relationship? And you have their email address and you can sell other stuff to them. And that's always been my biggest, just like the biggest no-no for me is like, well, we're just going to throw it on Amazon, see what happens. And like, people do make money. Like clearly you make real money that way.
Yeah. I mean, and the difference between what I'm doing and what a lot of people are doing is like, I am still like all the stuff you're talking about, all the audience building, all the niching down, all the selling to a specific audience. I'm doing that. Amazon is just one of my platforms, you know, like, and it's not as, and one thing that I want to get into much more are the direct sales that you're talking about, like setting it up through the website. And that is something like in 2021, I'm trying really hard I'm pivoting hard into. I'm not going to give up the Amazon, but like, I don't want to be dependent on it.
It's where to go in the future. Is like, it's smart to have as many revenue sources as possible. Cause like you probably know, the rug on any one of them can get pulled out from you at any moment. And this is a lesson that I've learned the hard way more times than I care to admit. I had to learn it. It feels like every time I say that I've learned it, I throw all my eggs in one basket again. And then I was like, shit, I'm never going to make that mistake again. But I actually am diversifying my income now. So
yeah, me too. And you know, and I just sat here and said, you know, I did this good on Amazon, but honestly, like, you know, 3 years ago, man, I mean, I'd be a multi-millionaire if I had done the exact same, you know, audience numbers that I did this year, 3 years ago on Amazon, you know, and that, I mean, that's just mind blowing. And, you know, in another 2 years, it could be gone or it could be much less. Like I just think it's a mistake to count on that. And I keep, you know, using Amazon as an example, but I'm talking about traditional distribution. I'm talking about, you know, whether you get a deal with Hulu or Netflix and, you know, those don't pay what people think they do anyway. And all those, like, I don't think that's the future of independent filmmaking.
I tend to expand that out to platforms like YouTube. Like, a lot of people think YouTube is the great savior of media, and it can be. Like, you can reach an audience and they have your crazy magical algorithms that will recommend your stuff to people. But functionally, as a platform, you don't own the relationship with the audience. Like, even when they subscribe, YouTube can pull all sorts of shenanigans to prevent you from from communicating and sharing whatever you've made with your audience. So that's always like the functional question for me is like, where are people online already spending their attention, specifically this niche that I've chosen? And how can I engineer systems that constantly take advantage of these platforms, but I don't rely on them. I don't build my business on them. I don't like it's like this idea of sharecropping, like building a business on rented land.
Yeah.
Where you're just playing a losing game in the long run. And it might feel great for a year or two until there's an algorithm change, until there's some crazy change in the terms and conditions where all of a sudden your type of content is just declared like off limits.
Right.
And boom, your channel's gone. If you haven't built that email list, you don't have phone numbers, you don't have any kind of direct, just like unfuckwithable means of communicating with your audience, you're I don't know, you're playing with fire. So the question is just got to be, how can I pull people from these platforms to channels that I own? Because otherwise it's just a huge risk for a creative career.
And, like I said, I've talked a lot about Amazon, but I mean, I really don't see any difference between Amazon and YouTube as far as the business model and the way we're monetizing and the way they keep changing things. I mean, YouTube just did another major change where they're throwing ads up on non-monetized stuff now.
Yeah. At least with YouTube, like you can throw links into the description of your thing to pull people more easily. Like you can put links like actually in your content so that you can start that flow of people from their platform to yours, whereas Amazon's super restrictive about that crap. But I'm constantly thinking about like, we need to find really sneaky ways to pull people off of Amazon's platform, but it feels like they're always 2 steps ahead on that one.
Yeah.
Thinking like, let's use QR codes, but they catch on.
Right. What brought you to start Filmmaker Freedom?
I started writing for No Film School back in 2012, I want to say. Like, Jesus, it's been a long time since then. But I wrote for No Film School for like 3 years, like really, really solidly. And I put out a ton of stuff, and I don't know how, like, I don't want to like bash No Film School, but the incentives were based on traffic at the time. So you write things that get a lot of clicks, we pay you based on those clicks. So what that incentivized from a creator or producer perspective was make a lot of stuff, give it clickbait headlines, and don't go in depth. Don't do really quality work. Just find some YouTube videos of a tutorial that somebody put out, write a 200-word description of it, give it a clickbait headline, and boom, get paid. And that was great for a while. Like, it was a really easy way to make money. But it started wearing on my soul a little bit because so much of it was just like gear porn. So much of it was like BuzzFeed garbage, but translated into the filmmaking world. Yep. I just started working on my own thing. And originally it wasn't about the business because I was in that mind space of like, indie film is a garbage business. I am going to approach this as a hobby. And so originally it was about sort of like mindset and craft and doing work that you're proud of and all of these things that I really wanted to talk about on No Film School, but the economic incentives weren't there. It was really just over the years, building my own business, working for marketing clients, talking to Mike Dion and having that oh shit moment that the seeds were planted for how do we solve this problem of selling directly to fans? How do we identify niches where this will actually work? And so on, to the point where like that's now entirely what Filmmaker Freedom is. But it's been a really long, weird journey to get to that point.
Larry, how do you walk that fine line between you want people to click on this link and clickbait?
I think I've swerved in the exact opposite direction with my headlines. It depends. Like I basically don't do anything clickbaity anymore, but every headline always, regardless of what you're doing, should make a promise. And if you understand your audience well enough, which is a big, big thing that I just hammer on, regardless of whether you're running a site like ours or a channel like yours, or you're serving an audience for your indie films, so much of the magic happens when you deeply understand your people and what they care about. And it's not just demographics, it's not age, where they live and income levels and education. Like it's deep psychological, psychographic stuff. It's what do they care about? What's their worldview, their belief system? What are their deepest, darkest fears? What are their dreams? And when you understand this sort of smorgasbord, is that the word? I don't even know. But when you understand people on this deep psychological level, it becomes a lot easier to say things that are going to resonate with them or create things that are going to resonate with them. And that's what informs my headline. So I like understated headlines that are, they're very clear and very direct, but underneath that should always be a promise that's really compelling to the specific audience that I'm trying to reach.
Let's talk a little bit about the traditional distribution versus DIY. So what's your general take on traditional distribution and DIY now? I think I know, but
yeah. Traditional distribution obviously works for some people, specifically at the higher levels of the industry. Some of these boutique distributors, like your A24s and your Neons and such. Outside of that, my general inclination is that it's a dumpster fire that should be avoided at all costs. Because fundamentally, it comes down to the idea that, like, unless you're going with one of these high-end companies, you are basically on the hook for all or most of the marketing, and they're not going to provide you with many services. They might get you to certain platforms, but unless they're really investing a lot of money in you, they're very likely not going to advertise you. They're very likely not going to get you great artwork or any of the assets that you need. And my general feeling is that if you are marketing, if you're doing the work of connecting with fans and getting your movie into places where people are going to care about it and hopefully watch it, you should be rewarded for that work on account of the fact that it's your film. And if you're working with a distributor and they've got all sorts of funky ass marketing expenses and all sorts of opaque business practices on the back end, and you're doing all of this work to drive attention and goodwill, you're basically padding their bank account before you ever get paid for the work that you made and that you're promoting. And very often they don't provide services that you can't do yourself with an aggregator, or even just going straight to your fans. And it's so many of these distributors these days, like, I don't know. I think a lot of us are still bought into the idea that just getting a distribution deal is validation.
Yeah.
Because we were all conditioned for so long that getting a distributor is scarce, it's rare, it's hard, it's valuable. All the while, the industry and the landscape completely changed, and now most of them they're bulk distributors. They basically pick up anything and everything for as cheaply as humanly possible, and they do as little work with all of these as humanly possible. They just throw them on Amazon, they throw them on Tubi, they throw them wherever else, and they hope that one of them will cover the costs of everything else. It's throw a lot of shit at the wall and see what sticks. But the point there is that it's extraordinarily easy to get a distribution deal these days. But a lot of filmmakers are still so bought into this idea that it's a sign of validation. It's a sign that you've quote unquote made it. That they're still looking for that as the final outcome. And I don't know, I've been ranting for a while, but the long and short of it is that unless you're working at the higher end, the higher end side of the indie film spectrum, you're almost certainly better off going directly to your fans and trying to do it yourself.
Yeah, I want to say just one thing about the traditional distributors too, and how easy it is to get distribution. And it's not just been like in the last 10 years. For anybody that really knows how to work it, it's been easy to do independent distribution since probably the mid 2000s. I mean, I think my first movie came out in 2005, and I have never, not on one single movie that I've went to a distributor with, have I had trouble getting it out. Not maybe one out of 50 movies. It's not hard.
Even not harder now, because you look at all these all these lower end distributors, and they are hungry, and they are desperate, because so many of the economics of the distribution business model have been upended in the past 5 to 10 years. So they've sort of had to, their hand has been forced to take on this sort of volume distributor thing. It's really sad to see. I don't know.
Yeah.
mostly because so many people still buy into that as a sign that they've made it, when in fact they're one of thousands, and they're just going to end up on Amazon, in the dustbin of media history.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of filmmakers are still like, I remember when self-publishing first started to be a thing, book publishing, and so many people were like, "Oh, those aren't real authors." You know, the same thing with filmmaking when we first started figuring out we could DIY release and this. Oh, that's not real filmmaking. You have to have a distributor. I mean, there's still people doing it.
All the while, there are people who are self-publishing who are laughing their way to the bank.
Yep.
Because they figured it out. To be fair, like self-publishing is like, especially on Amazon, is still kind of I won't say it's the wild, wild west, but it's like, it's just so noisy, and there's such a low bar for quality that a lot of these same things that we're talking about is identifying a specific niche, identifying what these people care about and making something specifically for them, and then marketing to them and building relationships with them. That's still what wins the game there, even though like there's a million people publishing just really shitty ebooks on anything and everything. There's a lot of people publishing like automated ebooks where it's like 12 pages of like content they scraped from Reddit or something. like there's a lot of shenanigans there, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Right. So this will be my last question. I ask everybody this, hypothetical. So if I were to show up on your doorstep with $50,000, you have to make an independent film with it. What type of film would you make? And like, what would be the basic breakdown of how you'd spend that budget?
It's interesting because I'm not in the like actively looking to make films game right now. I would probably not make a feature film. I would probably start some sort of like really, really niche media venture that, it might be YouTube, it might be somewhere else, but it would be highly focused on a specific niche that I care about. The one that comes to mind that I'm focusing on in different ways other than film is the realm of political depolarization. It's just one of those things, like, you see the state of public discourse and political discourse, and it's a dumpster fire, and everybody hates each other, and it's bad news bears if we want to solve the most challenging problems of our time. So I might start there. I don't know exactly how I would profit within this niche, even though it's vibrant. There are a lot of people tackling it from different perspectives. But my go-to-market strategy on whatever it would be tapping into this network of influential people, the sizable audiences very often that they've built and the trust they've accumulated, maybe getting them to appear in some of these smaller projects that I'm putting out on YouTube. It'd probably be a web series.
And where would you start looking for those people? Like YouTube guys, like Instagram?
Most of them I've found through Twitter. Because there's a crazy amount of political discourse that happens on Twitter. A crazy amount of it is vitriolic garbage, but there are people out there who are, I don't know, fighting the good fight, so to speak. But they're also on YouTube. There are other filmmakers who've made projects around this. There are people on YouTube who are doing it. There are people with Facebook pages and groups. There are a lot of nonprofits that are tackling this from just from a much higher level top down perspective. So, and I have a big database of all of these people already. That's one of the things that I do whenever I go into a new ditch is I document it relentlessly. I find anybody and everybody who's even vaguely influential in the space, like whether they're the tiniest social media influencer all the way up to the biggest nonprofits and media organizations and everybody in between who's built trust with the people that I'm looking to connect with. And then I start connecting with them like one-on-one and building relationships and not asking for anything, not saying promote my shit, but just being real.
And like how specifically do you do that? Are you talking about like they make a tweet, you're liking and replying to their tweet, maybe retweeting it, like stuff like that? Yeah.
I mean, it depends on every influencer and I hate the word influencer, by the way. It's the worst. And we need
I know. I wish,
need a better.
Well, it wouldn't be so bad. It's just, I don't mind the word itself, but it's been misused and demonized, and it has a negative connotation now. Yeah.
It just brings to mind for me of like, spoiled rich kids on Instagram or TikTok who are like getting paid to be spoiled rich kids, and just big old bag of barf.
Right. When in actuality,
but
there's a bigger percent of influencers that are out there, like they're like legit entrepreneurial hustlers, you know,
yeah.
coming from
So
nothing.
yeah. So to answer your question though, is it depends on the specific person, like observing where they are, what kind of media they put out, interacting them. Like you could definitely, interact with people on Twitter. Like that's the one great thing about Twitter is that you can basically go interact with anybody, no matter how famous they are, and interact one-to-one. And especially in this niche context, like nobody's that famous within a specific niche that they have that head of like, oh, I don't interact with people, or I need a team to interact with people for me. But my general playbook is to find the channels that they seem to be most active on, interact with them a little bit there, and then I send an outreach message. And one of my favorite tactics for this kind of thing is just to send a little video using something like Loom, where it's just like 2 to 3 minutes. And it's the structure is essentially, hey, I really admire your work, and be specific. Like you put out such and such piece and I thought it was awesome because such and such reason. Be general, or be like really specific and be very generous with your feedback. And, you essentially want to signify that you have shared values and beliefs and all of that. And then my call to action on those kinds of things is like, after saying like, here's what I'm doing, here's why, like what I'm doing in this space, is I would love to get to know you a little bit more, and maybe we could like talk about what you're up to and see if there are ways for us to collaborate. It's not, hey, will you promote my movie? Or hey, I want you to be an affiliate, or it's not making any kind of explicit ask. It's coming from this place of empathy, from this place of generosity, saying, I'd love to get to know you. I want to be legit friends, and we'll like see if there are ways for us to collaborate. But the first step in that, being real and focusing from a perspective of relationships instead of taking advantage of people.
Yeah. I think it kind of comes back to the self-focused attempts to try to reach someone.
Well, it's all the same, man. And it's a worldview, right? You have to internalize that. It's not just when you're marketing that you have to be empathetic and care about your people. It's in every aspect of your life and your business. I don't know, it gets into some sort of like touchy-feely territory, but when you take care of people, they take care of you. Like that's a fundamental law of the universe. Like we're all wired to connect and feel reciprocity towards those or act reciprocally towards those who've done kindnesses towards us and for whom we have shared values with. And when you start operating that way, fundamentally, like just from the center of your being, be surprised at how much easier it is to connect with people and get them to care, whether it's an individual influencer or whether it's a niche of tens or hundreds of thousands of people. Like it's all sort of the same underlying impulse of serve instead of take. Because what comes back to you is tenfold when you do that, and you do it from a real place.
And don't forget to check out Filmmaker Freedom. It's very cool and informative. But whatever you do, keep making movies.
There's just so much sort of bullshitty advice in the indie film business space that may or may not have been true 10 to 15 years ago, but is still peddled as reality, as a fact. And I just can't take it anymore, man. And you're the only person I see anywhere, maybe other than Alex Ferrari, who's doing something different and actually exploring the edges and figuring out how to take advantage of new opportunities instead of doubling down on just old systems and old ways of doing business that clearly don't serve anybody anymore, least of all filmmakers.
Yeah, I think one of the major problems with filmmakers, and Alex Ferrari has said this before, but, a lot of us, especially, some of us older cats, we came up in the 90s, with that independent, Tarantino, Rodriguez, Spike Lee explosion. And we just, we're expecting those kind of results, like we're expecting to come out to Hollywood and do a movie, like one movie, and it's just going to blow up, and everybody. And then on the other hand, all the other filmmakers, like they're still looking at that, I want to make big studio pictures. And, there's a wide range of different types of filmmakers and different types and sizes of movies. I mean, there's a whole industry just for micro budget films.
You could tell me if you've experienced this as well, but one of my big frustrations over the past 2 years in particular, where I've really been focusing on business and marketing and entrepreneurship for indie filmmakers, is that, I don't know, it's hard to quantify, but 95% plus are totally closed off to even the notion of taking the reins on those things, because they're still so emotionally bought in to the old way of doing things. You know, they read Rebel Without a Crew when they were, I don't know, in college or high school, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's still, like, even though the world has just dramatically changed since any of that worked, they're still emotionally bought into the narrative. And I've realized that so much of my job, and part of the reason that I have frustrations right now, is that my job is just changing people's minds and changing their hearts about what they want. And that's a really frustrating place to be.
Yeah, I know, speaking just for myself, I mean, I moved out to Los Angeles in 2005, I think. And, you know, I was 27, 28, I can't remember. I just finished my first movie, you know, super low budget horror movie. And I thought when I got out here, like, you know, I still had that. I was going to be the next Robert Rodriguez thing. I was going to be a big filmmaker. I was going to be making these studio movies. And let me preface what I'm saying here too. Like, I'm not saying that that's not still a goal, that I don't want to make bigger movies or I don't want to make studio stuff. And I'm not shitting on anybody that does, but there's a whole other realm out there. There's an infinite number of ways to make your living as a filmmaker. It doesn't just have to be on big, slick studio stuff. You can make small independent films and make a living.
Maybe like the weird irony of that is that by getting to a place where, like, my whole thing is building audiences for the long term. So it's not just focusing on one project and then abandoning everything you've done and moving to the next.
Yeah.
But building a relationship with an audience over time and getting to a place where you can sustainably live from that. It's also the kind of thing that attracts opportunities from industry players, because you become less risky. You have a direct means of communication and a direct means of profiting from your work without them. And it makes you more of a sure bet. So when you come to the negotiating table, so to speak, not only do you have more leverage, but you're more likely to get favorable deals, to get more financing and investment, to come away with distribution deals that aren't a pile of hot garbage. Coincidentally, by taking this DIY route, more often than not, you're more prepared to succeed in the industry apparatus. I don't know what you would call it. And you can walk away from the clownishness of it and the really, like, predatory side of it if it doesn't serve you, because you have a better option. I don't know. I'm just constantly amazed by the way these two sides of the coin, and there's probably more ways to do it, but they're not mutually exclusive.
No. And if you look at a few examples of, you know, some of these big lottery ticket winning filmmakers we talked about, like, you know, Rodriguez or Tarantino, I keep saying the same names over and over, but you know, these guys all, you know, for that time, they did a lot of these steps. You know, they were independent film entrepreneurs. I mean, sure, they got to be lottery ticket winners and that helped out. But, you know, like Rodriguez, he had shot, like, you know, how many short films before he did El Mariachi? Like, you know, he had been testing the waters. He was a prolific filmmaker.
That's another one of these, I don't know, just themes that I'm constantly trying to just hammer home, is that creating a body of work over time, even if it's a bunch of tiny ass little shorts. Like, I don't know. I love, you know, microfilms or micro shorts or whatever you'd call them. These little 1 minute, 5 minute projects that you can make at least a couple of them a year. But they increase the surface area for opportunity coming into your life. Whereas if you spend 2 years, 3 years hunkered down on a feature where nobody really knows what you're doing, you don't have any proof of your work available in the world. And then obviously making money from a feature film that you've spent 3 years on is generally a shitty proposition just all the way around. But there's really something to this idea that putting out a lot of work and being prolific is what attracts real opportunities. But so many filmmakers have been conditioned into this, like, go big or go home mindset that ultimately is really self-defeating.
Yeah. And as I was saying, it took me, probably, you know, 15 years it took me making movies for that to really sink in. I mean, I was doing it anyway. Like I
Yeah.
was like, okay, I'm going to make something rather than nothing. But I wasn't necessarily happy in the earlier part of my career making those little movies. I wanted to make bigger movies, and I felt like this was less than. And it took me several years to change my mindset. I was definitely, if you would take me then, put me now, I'd be a hater on my channel or your site, just the same as some of these other guys.
I don't know. I think that's kind of like an impulse that just comes with the territory of being a creative. Is we all of us grew up watching the same filmmakers having really good taste. Like that's often what gets us into doing this in the first place. And it can be really hard to disconnect that taste that we have from the expectations that we have of ourselves in our work.
Right.
Ultimately, it's letting go of those expectations and creating regardless, and creating prolifically and consistently, that actually gets you to that place where you've built up your skills, your network, your all of this to the place where you can really outpace anything that you would have done otherwise. But I don't know, it's sort of a weird philosophical thing. It's like you have to let go of high expectations in order to ever get anywhere near them.
Right. And I think it's important to quantify by saying we're letting go of high expectations. We are trying to do the best that we can. We are trying to make the best work that we can make, the most polished work that we can make, but we are not, keeping those I'm going to make a movie that looks like a $20 million movie. I'm not going to make a studio movie.
What's the phrase? It's something like start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. Right. It's always stretching the ability that you have with your current circumstances and resources. And just by the nature of pushing those bounds little by little, you get to the place where you have more resources and more to work with and better skills to be able to execute on these, lofty visions that so many of us have.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that there's no, I don't see any positive outcome to not making movies because you don't have your budget. Like, I want to do this movie, but I don't have the budget, so I'm just not going to make anything. Well, okay, maybe you don't have enough money to shoot that movie, but what can you shoot? Shoot something. Because I just did an interview with this guy, Dan Lotz. He talks about folk filmmaking. And he went out and made 3 improv features where he's pretty much the only actor. Like, he had a friend helping him with camera sometimes, made them for $300-400, but they look great. They're good stories. And he just went out and did it. He didn't wait for anybody to say, oh, here, let me give you permission to make this. Let me give you the money to make this. He just went and did it.
What's folk filmmaking? What does that mean? Is that the niche he goes into, or is it like a filmmaking style, or like?
Yeah, it's kind of a new. I don't want to use the word dogma, but you remember Van Trier, Dogma film.
Oh yeah, of course.
It's like that. They don't really have a set of rules, but they're kind of make movies at all costs.
Gotcha.
And they release them a lot of times free source, say on YouTube, with, it might be monetized, but there's no, rental, or there's no SVOD or TVOD or any of that.
Interesting.
Yeah. And the purpose, he's trying to, again, just like you said, he's building his audience, to a point where he can monetize that in a bigger way, and he's not, none of them are adverse to, say, trying Amazon or something like that, but they want to build their audiences first on something like YouTube.
Creative restrictions lead to just unbounded creativity. When you give yourself these guardrails that you have to work within, it focuses you in a way that very little else can. And it's one of the things that like we're talking about, just it gets you to the point where you make work and get it out into the world without constantly going down the perfectionist rabbit hole of, oh, I need to make this better. Oh, I need to spend the next 9 months looking for investors so that I can finish this in post.
I think there's a point when you're making films professionally, right? Regardless of your budget, and it happens on big movies all the time. They have schedules. There's a certain point where, as an artist, you got to say, this is good enough, or this is as good as it's going to get. It doesn't mean you don't push it and do the best you can, but you get to a certain point where, I've been editing for 20 years, and there's a point in an edit, where you're just making changes. You're not making it better anymore. You're just making changes. And
Yeah.
I think that holds for, the film as a whole.